Could this be the financial system's best kept secret? Yeah, maybe, and it's a scary secret because over $80 trillion worth of bad debt has just been exposed. The Bank of International Settlements has come out warning that there's at least $80 trillion of hidden debt that we don't even know about within the financial system, which could blow up in a crisis. They said it's a huge missing and growing pile of debt. Yikes. And 80 trillion is such a big number, it's hard to even understand. So let's try though. If you took a single dollar bill and then you stacked with other dollar bills until you reached the moon, one on top of the other, you would need around 4 trillion single dollar bill notes. This is 20 times that amount is what we're talking about here. But yeah, of course, crypto's the problem. Crypto's only used by criminals. Oh, come on, man. So just what is this $80 trillion debt bomb? Well, first, let's understand who's saying it. It's coming from the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank to the world's central banks. So kind of an important organization. They just released an explosive report that admitted to this $80 trillion existing hole in short-term dollar debt that's been hidden off of balance sheets around the world. Why would the Bank of International Settlements even admit this is going on? That in of itself is a worrying question to ask. Why now? Why even say this about this, right? And all that's just sitting right in the middle of the foreign exchange derivatives market. It's in the form of foreign exchange swaps, known as FX swaps. Here is an example of an FX swap. It's a pretty easy concept. So let's say that a Dutch pension fund, they borrow dollars and they lend out some euros. The pension fund then later comes back, repays the dollars and receives back their euros. It's all pretty straightforward sounding, right? However, the payment obligations from these instruments are where we start getting a bit tricky because it's all recorded off of the balance sheets in a blind spot. Why? This means the financial system is operating with barely any visibility of the FX swap markets. Can you believe that? Well, of course you can believe that. This is the same, financial system that let the credit default swap crash basically bring the global economy down to its knees in 2008. Things haven't really changed very much, unfortunately. Anyway, no one knows the very specific details of all this debt because again, it's off the books. The central banks, regulators, and analysts are all in the dark here, although we do know enough to know that there is warning bells that should be going off, and it's a dangerous game. But here's what we know that we don't know. 1, where exactly the debt is. 2, exactly how much debt there is, that 80 trillion is an estimate. And 3, what a solution to this actually looks like. So who exactly owes the $80 trillion in debt? Well, again, the fine details are a massive gray area, but what we do know is that it's largely held by non-bank financial institutions and funds all over the world. Again, there's like insurance providers, stuff like that. Everyone outside the US, right? And it's worth repeating, it's a huge missing and growing pile of debt, right? It's crazy. And in most cases, the USA is the lender of this debt, a foreign country then as the buyer of the dollars. Now the report from the BIS, they go on to say non-banks outside of the United States owe as much as 25 trillion in such missing debt, up from 17 trillion in 2016, and non-US banks owe upwards of 35 trillion. Now, looking at the counterparty risk involved here, we can see a lot of it is other financial institutions, funds, insurance companies, etc., etc. You can see it highlighted in pink on this chart here. Now, this will include, of course, the pension funds, the insurance companies, non-reporting banks, private lenders, all kinds of stuff like this. Now, according to the Bank of International Settlements data, the overall debt is greater than the holdings of US Treasury bills, which is, of course, the national debt repurchase agreements and commercial paper all combined. That's a heck of a lot of debt, man. Holy cow. And it's grown over $55 trillion in just the last decade. So the debt just keeps going up. So I'm going to take a wild guess here that in 10 years' time, it's going to be a heck of a lot larger than it is right now. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. And almost no one knows it even exists. Now, before we break down the risks of this $80 trillion mess, I just wanted to let you know about Wealth Mastery. This is my weekly value-packed crypto newsletter. Every week, over 50,000 readers are getting straight to their inboxes the latest on NFTs, altcoins, DeFi, market analysis, and much, much more. You can use that link down below in the description here to sign up for free. So, what are the risks of this $80 trillion debt? Well, by allowing companies to borrow dollars in return for another currency, it creates a big potential stress point for global markets. FX swaps and currency swaps more broadly are extremely vulnerable to shortages during a financial crisis moment. Now, this was the case back in 2008, of course, when the great financial crisis came and hit and messed everything up. The same happened again in March 2020 during the big COVID crash. That, of course, was when the Federal Reserve had to step into these markets, well, similar markets, in order to bail out the overnight dollar repo markets with trillions in liquidity, because the liquidity just wasn't there. And this is a bigger problem. The FX swaps are a bigger problem. Now, even though both these crises had their differences, the same problem occurred. Liquidity, 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 man. On top of the fact that this debt is hidden. Sky-high debt, of course, with rising interest rates on that debt, and the debt itself is growing bigger all the time. Now, this debt is also extremely short-term, just basically churning through the system at super rapid rates. The foreign exchange swap line is exchanging and turning over a ton of dollars every single day. In fact, the turnover was almost $5 trillion a day back in April of 2022. Again, it only takes 4 trillion single dollar bills stacked on top of each other to get to the frickin' moon, man. These are big numbers we are talking about here. Now, these FX swaps account for about 66% of daily global foreign exchange turnover. And when you consider all of the currencies on both sides of these trades, the total amount is actually estimated to be even higher than the $80 trillion number. In fact, it was estimated to be as high as $97 trillion at the end of June 2022. Again, the actual number is hard to get a grasp on because so much of it is hidden. It's off the books. We don't know exactly. These are all just estimates, right? Now, this matched global GDP in 2021 at 96 trillion, by the way, and was 3 times global trade at 29 trillion back in 2021. Now, that's a lot of money changing hands and currencies on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And again, I just need to keep stressing it. It's all off the balance sheet. There's no official records of what's happening. It's all estimates based on what we can see into this market. And of course, it's the US dollar that is on the majority of the side of these trades. 88% of the trades are in dollars. So the dollar can essentially act as an intermediary currency to help these foreign countries, of course, get access to other currencies. It is being used as a tool here. So for example, an FX swap though from like Swiss francs over to Polish zloty would basically swap the francs for dollars and then the dollars over for the Polish currency. Can we just take a moment to appreciate how inefficient that is, how much more fees must be coming in because of that? This is why crypto wins in the long term. Anyway, I digress. So this all creates a massive chain of debt, a massive potential domino effect of borrowing and lending within the financial system. Now, the BIS report also explains much of this debt is very, very short term, and the resulting rollover needs make for dollar funding squeezes because you need so much money on such a regular basis. Policy responses to such squeezes, of course, include central bank swap lines. We saw that with the repo markets back in 2020, but we have very little information again about the geographic distribution of this particular $80 trillion of missing debt. Most of the debt, of course, has a maturity date of less than a year, but if we delve into that actually more, the report from the BIS says that up to 70% of this debt is maturing within a week. So every week, 70% of that debt is maturing, and more than 30% of it's maturing overnight, which are pretty damn crazy numbers, because this means that if there is another major financial crisis where lending dries up, where liquidity dries up almost overnight, as has happened before, then you have a lot of money unaccounted for in that situation. The entire global economy is at risk. The entire global economy, in fact, always has been, and will remain for the foreseeable future, a giant house of cards. And this is the exact kind of opaque debt crisis that can break the entire global economy. And of course, regular people are the ones that suffer the most if that happens. Anyway, let's just hope they can keep kicking the can down the road for a while, because when and if this thing blows, it's not gonna be pretty. Okay, that's it. Subscribe now. See you next time.